Well, hello, friends. Welcome so much to the channel. I'm so glad to have you all here today. This is so exciting because we're going to be doing some interviews with different people throughout the history of the channel in the future. And I'm really happy to have with me here today one of my favorite people, one of my favorite paranormal researchers, and the greatest tour guide in Chicago, Tony Szabelski. And I'm not saying that just because he worked for our tour company for so long. He really is the best, and everybody agrees with that. You can look on the Google reviews for Chicago hauntings and see that he is the best, just like I said. Um, you may find it weird that we're going to be talking about haunted places today. We're talking about haunted Elgin, Illinois, and ghost stories of Elgin, Illinois, which is a very cool old town along the Fox River. And as like so many of these towns, most of these towns, it's got a lot of really great ghost stories. In fact, Tony has done tours of Elgin, Illinois for what, like 10 years
About 10
now?
years, about 10
About
years.
10 years, yeah. So it's got so much to offer to people who are interested in ghostly legends and stories and the supernatural. As you probably know by now, I myself do not do a lot of ghost hunting anymore for fun. I do still help families that are having issues with paranormal, supernatural disturbances. And I'm still very interested in haunted places and how ghost stories are connected to the supernatural. And I think, like you probably know by now, I think it's very dangerous to go to these places. So you'd have to really do a lot of protection and be in a good state of mind and a good emotional and spiritual state to visit these places that have ghost stories attached to them, because some of them can be very dangerous to visit. But with that said, I do think that telling these ghost stories and going to these places, it really is a great reminder of how real the supernatural is. And this was really why I started out in the paranormal and started writing about the paranormal, because I found that so many people came to a belief in the supernatural and a belief in God, even because of their experiences with the paranormal. So I think these can be very valuable for a spiritual growth, as well as just, a great way to learn about history, because so many times these ghost stories are connected to history, especially tragic history. I've talked about this in some videos already. Oftentimes we'll have evil spirits or, demonic spirits that they capitalize on tragedy to pretend to be, someone who's was murdered at a site or someone who passed away at the site. So oftentimes, when you are getting messages from people who claim to be someone who's passed away, someone who's been killed at a site, you got to be very cautious about that, because you're never quite sure who it is. But regardless of who it is, these are really fascinating stories that are connected to the history of a place. And then you're going to find that today with the history and the hauntings of Elgin. So let's jump right in talking to Tony Szabelski about some of the great ghost stories of Elgin, Illinois. Now, Tony, what is just the general history of Elgin, just so that the listeners, viewers can get just a kind of a picture of who settled Elgin and how did it develop, what the industries there, what people do for a living over these, however many years since Elgin was established.
Well, first off, thank you for the great introduction. And Elgin was first established in about 1835, so it is one of the older towns in the Chicago area. It was founded by the Gifford brothers, kind of accidentally. They were just on their way out west, and they liked the setting of Elgin along a lot of natural ridges and bluffs along the Fox River. So they decided to settle a town there. James Gifford actually has a headstone in Bluff City Cemetery, one of the founders. The Elgin Watch Company was a big company from Elgin that, you still see Elgin watches around
Our
today.
moms always had the Lady Elgin watch.
A lot of people have worked at the Elgin Watch Factory throughout the years. Borden Milk was first in. Is still just down the street from Bluff City Cemetery. many years back with Chicago paranormal investigators. Dave Olson. I did an investigation in that building with him. And Elgin caskets became very prominent. JFK, after he was shot in Dallas, his body was transported back to Washington, D.C. in an Elgin casket.
Did not know that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, why don't we start out with the Elgin Casket Factory then?
Okay.
And tell us, your experiences with research at the Elgin Casket Factory and what stories are there.
Now, it is a massive building. To even be able to go through that building on a tour would take a long time. So to do a ghost hunt there, you had to find certain sections to ghost hunt. The building, I think that is actually the third location. I could be wrong about that, but I think that's the third location of the third building that may have been on that location of the Elgin Casket Company. I think it was first founded sometime in the 19th century. And they actively made caskets up until not that long ago. The building itself, and again, I'm trying to remember, a lot of this is coming from memory, because that wasn't a regular stop on the tours I did out there for, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I think it was more like 12 years. I think in 2011 is when I started working for Diane out there, giving tours. That wasn't always one of the regular stops, as we did a bus tour initially, and we would go by it and talk a little bit about it. But I think there was some bodies were found just outside the building many years ago, and a lot of people claim that they don't know who dumped these bodies there. I think they were eventually identified, but a lot of people claim that all of these bodies that were left nearby haunt the building. People have seen them like moving throughout as shadow figures. And I do remember on the investigation.
They don't know where these bodies came from?
I think whoever killed them, it's an unsolved mystery still.
Oh my gosh, okay. Wow, that's crazy.
But I remember on one of the investigations, we were in this just big, massive room where I guess they used to construct the caskets. And several people saw like shadow figures moving throughout that room as we were doing the investigation.
Wow. So was this during the investigation that you did with Dave Olson?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Dave Olson, for those of you who don't know him, is the founder of Chicago Paranormal Investigators, one of the oldest ghost hunting teams in the country. Been doing it for probably 25 years, I would say. Yeah. So, wow, amazing. Okay, so I'm trying to remember my other list as I didn't write it down. Oh, a place that everybody wants to go in Elgin, the old Elgin State Hospital.
Yeah.
Tell us about Elgin State Hospital.
Now, during the tours, of course, we were not allowed anywhere near the active facility for Elgin State Hospital, because that is still an active facility off of Route 31. But we used to go to the back gate. It's behind, there's a whole bunch of, I don't know if you know, there's a big,
hold on just 1 second. Can you just back up and repeat all that? Because we had a little glitch in your video, so we lost that. So if you could just back up and restart that.
Okay. We never actually went to the Elgin Mental State Hospital on any of the tours or their grounds, simply because we could not. It's still an active facility off of Route 31. But we used to go to a back gate. Now, I know you said you were just recently out in Elgin driving around. I'm not sure if you saw the massive sports complex.
Yes,
there, but
yes.
Okay. That actually used to all be part of the Elgin Mental State facility. They had their own they had their own self-serving community there at one point. Where they, made their own, they grew their own food, they slaughtered animals, they made their own clothing, they had their own post office. In the cemetery it used to be kind of in the center of the complex. Now it's very remote behind this sports complex. And we used to also go into the cemetery. But when you went up to the back gate, you could actually see the active facility. You could see some of the grounds, and you could see one of the original buildings from the 1871 Elgin facility still there. And I know we'd get into the history of how, back in the day, especially when it first opened in 1871, how they didn't really know a lot about mental illness and how the people were treated with doing things like hot and cold shock therapy, where they'd dump you in this scalding hot bathtub full of water, or icy cold bathtub full of ice, because the belief was that by doing that it might shock you into being normal. And also just some of the other treatments that they did, like giving people shots of I guess there was a theory at one point that, like, say if you had gonorrhea, and they thought if they give you like shots containing syphilis, that they'd cancel each other out. But what it actually did was give you both diseases. So these are just kind of some of the therapy they did. And eventually in later years, like lobotomies and things like that. And a lot of people report a lot of strange activity along the back gate, adjacent from the sports complex, adjacent to the active Elgin mental state facility. Now, I never actually got to do this tour, but in the last couple of years, I worked for Diane Ladley before I worked for you, who ran Haunted Hometowns Corporation.
Yeah, great tours for many years in Naperville, Aurora, Elgin.
Yeah. She used to give a tour called the night at the Asylum, where she'd actually tell stories at this back gate, and then bring out equipment, and they'd ghost hunt back there. And then we'd go into, I did it with her a few times. I never actually did it on my own, where we'd go into the cemetery, the Elgin Mental State Cemetery. Basically, it's a potter's field. There are a bunch of headstones there with names on top of each headstone. There's a section where there's a bunch of unmarked graves also. But even though those headstones have one name on the top, it is believed that they were buried about 5 deep in that cemetery, because they ran out of space. Yeah. Plus, you'll also see a huge smokestack as you stand at the back gate. And it is believed that that smokestack was originally there because they were incinerating bodies that weren't picked up before they actually started burying them in the cemetery. So people have reported a lot of ghosts back there. People see like shadow figures moving back there. One time I remember on one of the tours, because that would be a regular stop on the bus tour that we did out there, several people saw what looked like a shadow figure moving just beyond this back gate, and somebody did get it in a picture.
And then
go ahead.
Can you repeat that?
Some people did get a picture of what looked like a shadow figure moving just beyond this gate on the grounds of the Elgin Mental State Facility several years back on one of the tours. And we used to get a lot of pictures with mists and orbs in it just behind that gate.
Now, are there any known occurrences, entities that are supposed to haunt the old hospital buildings, or even the new hospital buildings at Elgin State?
Well, Diane would always say that the people at the current Elgin State facility would not talk to her at all about any ghosts there. But there were stories for many years of the old facility. They say that a lot of the employees several employees would run out of that facility at night and never want to come back to work there, because they would see just these spirits of like deranged looking, ghosts with like something sticking out of their head or stabbing themselves, things like that. They said ambulance drivers used to even be afraid to pull up there and drop people off because of all the ghostly activity that took place. I don't have any really like specific names of people
Yeah.
that may have died there or that haunt there. I do know it, and it might be, if Diane still has a website somewhere out there, there was a picture taken at the cemetery, the Elgin Mental State Potter's Field, that looks like something coming out of one of the headstones.
It's interesting when you look around, you know, of course, we've been to a lot of these hospitals around the country, you know, Waverly Hills and Trans Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, and the prisons too, you know, like Old Joliet and Eastern State, Alcatraz. These are all places that are, you know, pilgrimage places for ghost hunters because of all the activity. Right. And so often it is this it's just this dark activity, shadow figures, and you know, very negative feelings that people have, a lot of like being pushed and things like that, being scratched. And, you know, it's interesting, you see the history of abuse and cruelty at these places. And, you know, we know, you know, the world of supernatural, like attracts like, right? Just like in the physical world, right? And it really seems to be that these places where such cruelty, such terrible things were done to other people, whether in hospitals or prisons. You know, it drew something there that's still often in a lot of these places. So that that negativity, I always, you know, caution people, don't go into these places if you're not in a good mood, if you're not healthy, if you're not feeling good, because there's stuff there that's gonna love you if you're depressed, angry, whatever. That may be there for years and years to come. Yeah. All right. You know, we're talking about the cemetery at Elgin State Hospital, you know, the big burial ground that so many people love to talk about in Elgin, is Bluff City. I know my husband started taking me there some years ago because his father is buried there in the military section, and we started going to the Memorial Day service there. It's just beautiful. I highly recommend it. But Bluff City Cemetery is a beautiful cemetery. It's very hilly. It reminds me a lot of Oak Ridge Cemetery, where Lincoln is buried in Springfield. And it's got a lot of ghost stories attached to it. Do you want to tell us about some of those?
Oh, definitely. That cemetery, in addition to doing a bus tour that would stop there, we would also do a 3-hour ghost in that cemetery, where we'd spend 3 hours just completely ghost hunting the cemetery. Yes, just in the cemetery. And we had a lot of strange activity on all those ghost tours. There is toward the
yeah, there you go. Can you back up, because you muted yourself there for a couple seconds?
Actually, somebody tried to call me.
Gotcha.
Declined. Near a second entrance to that cemetery off Bluff City Boulevard, on the farther end of it from the first entrance, is a big burial vault. It was never used to hold any bodies permanently. It was a temporary vault that was built years ago, when, especially in the winter months, when it was too hard for them to dig, before, you know, they had modern digging equipment, put the bodies in the ground. They'd wait till the spring thaw came, so it was easier to dig. They would house them in this vault temporarily. And a lot of the stories are that there's a darker entity that stays around this burial vault. I had a psychic, one of the tours several years back, who nicknamed this guy the Gatekeeper. She says he kind of watches over this area. She told me he doesn't like anybody, living or dead, to come to that area. And we had several encounters with him, including a former tour guide that used to assist me with the tours when I was doing them for Diane. One night, she had, we would usually set up ghost hunting equipment in the areas and ghost hunt throughout the cemetery. One night, we had a fairly large crowd, so we split up a little bit, but we were all by this big vault. and the crowd was getting a little anxious to move on because we had spent quite a lot of time there. So I started taking some of the crowd to the next spot we were going to in the cemetery, and she'd stayed back to gather a little bit of the equipment, and then she was going to come and meet me. So we're walking down the path. We're probably maybe 500-600 feet from where she was gathering the equipment, when all of a sudden she comes running up out of nowhere, accusing us in the group of like playing a dirty trick on her. She said, you guys were, as I was gathering the equipment, you guys were sneaking your heads around the corner and looking at me and then ducking behind the vault. And she didn't appreciate it. She thought we were freaking her out. And I said, no, that's not possible. We all left the area and everybody was walking with me. There was one taller guy who was kind of walking with us the whole night, like right up in front, where both me and her were, we were giving the tour. And she thought it was him specifically who, because what she saw was like a taller shadow figure.
Wow.
She accused him of like staying back there and, messing around with her. And I said, no, he was right next to me the whole time as we walked away. She actually resigned from giving the tours about 2 or 3 weeks after that.
Wow.
So that was
I wonder if at some point there was, something untoward going on with some of those bodies, necrophilia or ritual activity. Yeah.
That same psychic told me that she believed there was some unrest because even though they tagged the bodies as to where they were supposed to go and who they were, she said a lot of mistakes were made.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Another more humorous thing that happened one night on a tour, it was around the 4th of July. I had a tour there one night and was using the SB7, the ghost box. And normally we get responses from this entity where he would say that, he is the gatekeeper and he watches over that area and he doesn't really like us being there. This particular night, we weren't getting a lot of responses. So somebody in the group asked if the gatekeeper was there, and we got a response. Don't know if it was from him, it was probably from somebody else that said, no vacation.
Oh, oh my gosh. Oh, wow.
So I guess he took a little vacation.
Yeah, sometimes there's some humor, right?
He went away.
Wow, so that's Bluff City Cemetery. Interesting place. Now, right along one side of the cemetery runs Gifford Road, famous road in the annals of Chicagoland paranormal experience. Tell us about the history of Gifford Road and what the ghost stories are there.
Well, surprisingly, though, none of our tours actually went down Gifford Road, and I never really knew why Diane didn't want to do that. Possibly, maybe because one night the bus driver got a little lost. And I wasn't paying attention. He turned down that road thinking the entrance to the cemetery would be over that way. And that particular night, people were extremely freaked out going down that dark road. I don't know if you've ever been on Gifford Road at night.
Yeah.
There's very little lighting over there, and it was extremely dark. And the bus driver just he pulled up and stopped and just kind of opened the door. And a couple of people who were sitting up near the front by me said they saw something move right down the road there. And one of the guys who was assisting me with the tours, he had something in his hand and he was so freaked out by it that it actually flew out the open door of the bus. And he was afraid to get out of the bus right there to go get that. So actually we went back there the next day during the day to find the thing that fell out the door that he had. It was just kind of like a pointer that he used, but he was so freaked out by whatever it is that went down the road there that he would not get out of the bus at night to get it. So we had to go back the next day to get it.
No, I had heard about that area that of course there's all gravel quarries. on the
Right.
other
Yeah.
side of the road. So the cemetery is on
Yeah.
one side. And like you said, it's very dark. And I had heard that there is a legend about the road that, back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, people would drag race on Gifford Road. And there were many
Right.
accidents that
Mhm.
led to deaths. And that you will often see like the victims of these accidents or even the cars on Gifford Road. Have you heard those stories?
I think actually I read about them in one of your books.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I just found the story so fascinating. It was one of those things I heard about it and I just got in my car. I had to drive there right away and check it out because
Right.
it's such a cool story, as is that
Yeah.
whole area. One of the stories that I learned about when someone wrote to me after reading some of my books was the story of Channing Elementary School.
Mhm.
I think it was a student at the school actually that told me about some experiences that she and other classmates had there. Channing Elementary School has a very interesting history. Do you want to tell us about that?
Oh, definitely. Um, where the elementary school wasn't built until 1968, but what on the grounds where the elementary school is now used to be one of the early cemeteries for Chicago. That was the Channing Street grounds, um, which became the largest cemetery in Elgin shortly after the founding of the city. It was opened around 1840. And up until 1889, that was the place to, bury your loved ones in Elgin. As the city started to grow bigger, this wasn't enough land for like cemetery purposes for Elgin. So the city eventually purchased some old farmland um, near the ridge around what they called Bluff City at the time, which eventually became Bluff City Cemetery. And that became the new cemetery in town. Now, the plan was for them to relocate the bodies out of the Channing Street grounds and move them to the new cemetery, which, from what I'm understanding, the city did start doing this. But after a while, not getting much assistance from people who had loved ones buried there, the city just kind of stopped. They stopped moving the bodies. And then when people asked, are you going to move our loved ones? They were told that if you want them moved, you have to pay for it.
Hmm.
And a lot of people felt, we already paid to bury them once. Why should we pay to bury them again? So they didn't want to do that. So what the city eventually did is just leave the majority of the bodies there at the Channing Street grounds and move the headstones to Bluff City Cemetery. And then after a while, even when headstones weren't moved, they just kind of bulldozed the rest of them. After World War II, the area was sold to the school district in town, which they didn't build the school until 1968. When they put in the first building where the actual school is, I think it was 13 bodies were found there. They put an addition to the school in the 1990s. Another 9 bodies were found there. I remember years ago when I was doing more active tours out there, finding some articles from the Chicago Tribune where they claimed that the guys who were building the school, putting in the foundation of the original school, found these caskets, and that the caskets were so old, these old wooden caskets, that as they got near them, they just fell apart.
Hmm.
The construction company claimed that they tried to get all the human remains out of the school itself before putting in the foundation, but they weren't sure that they got them all out. And what they ended up doing was just kind of pushing the rest of it into the foundation of the school.
Hmm.
So there are human remains in the foundation of that school.
How sad. That's just terrible.
Yeah, very sad. And lots of stories throughout the years of, it doesn't seem like, one thing Diane would always emphasize is it doesn't seem like whatever entities are in there bother the kids. They tend to bother the teachers that are there after hours, like, correcting papers and setting up their curriculums for the next day. These teachers report seeing like shadow figures moving down the hallways. they'll have their doors open in their classrooms, and they'll report the doors will slowly slam shut.
Hmm.
Lots of stories from the night staff. We had a hard time keeping custodians there. There's stories of them running out of that building in the middle of the night, not wanting to come back to work because whatever they saw in there freaked them out too much. Now, one day I was giving a tour there. There are still some actual visible headstones on the grounds of the school itself.
Right, because there's that whole back area is like hilly, and there's a playground and like a park, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, exactly. There was one back there for a man named William Hackman, who actually used to work at the Elgin Watch Factory.
Oh.
I brought a whole group out to Headstone one time. We were walking back to where the bus would have been parked in the parking lot of the school. And there's some kids that were playing on the playground, came up to us and asked what we were doing. And I said it was a ghost tour. And the kids started telling us stories of lockers like slamming on their own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And toilets in the bathroom like flushing on their own. Also, when another night we were out at that headstone, we were using, I had a lady in the group who, she actually did some ghost hunting with Dave Olson's team for a while. Her name's Michelle, who was using one of the ghost apps. I want to say it was like Ghost Radar or one of those kind of things. And they do say words. And we got some words we did not understand. When we looked these words up, they turned out words in the German language, which that area was a German settlement at one point initially. So there's also stories of there being just, as you pull into the parking lot, just next to the school, there's a big like hilly ridge. And Diane says that whatever bodies they found left, they just kind of moved to a like big mass grave in that hilly ridge.
I've always thought that you've been to the Dunning Park, where which was established in Chicago, and they buried bodies that were found at the old Chicago State Hospital,
right
on the northwest side of Chicago. You know, there's that big mound in the back of the park. I always suspected that to be a mass grave. You know, they claimed that they buried the bodies throughout the park, but I don't know.
Right, that very well could be.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, Channing School. It's so eerie when you go there and you see that beautiful park in the back of the school, and then you find out that it's a cemetery. It's crazy. Okay, so you had mentioned that, you know, the big place where so many people worked in Elgin was the Elgin Watch Factory, which is a mall now, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's completely gone. So although they have it's like the part of the entrance gate is still there.
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah. Are there any ghost stories in the stores there from the Elgin Watch Factory?
The whole time I was out in Elgin, I never heard any ghost stories of the Elgin Watch Factory. Yeah. I know you had mentioned that in the message you sent to me yesterday. I was actually going to ask you if you ever heard of any.
No, I've never heard of any.
Yeah, no. Yeah. It's surprising that you would think maybe there'd be some.
Yeah, I guess there's not a lot of like watchmaking accidents, like deadly watchmaking accidents.
One of the safer professions.
You think like maybe there was like you know, the founder, one of the administrators that was like very, you know, connected to the place or something, but no, I haven't heard any either. But it's such a shame, you know, you go there, and Dave took me to show me where it was, and it's so tragic that it's just this mall now, and it was this such a cool place at one time. And yeah, like I said, you know, our moms all had the Lady Elgin watches. Yeah, so cool. But okay, so lastly, Elgin, the Fox River.
Yes.
Many stories on the Fox River. Paranormal investigators always believe that flowing water almost
Right.
acts like a conduit for paranormal activity. So these
Mhm.
towns along these rivers often have such great ghost stories, maybe connected to that, maybe not, but sure. Does Elgin have any stories about things directly on the Fox River or next to the Fox River?
Not so much in Elgin that I know of, but definitely in Aurora and St. Charles,
Hmm. Other towns along the river.
other towns along the Fox River. As you mentioned, Diane did a ghost tour, still does, for Chicago hauntings now in Aurora.
Which I've heard
And
is a great tour. I haven't been on it myself. I heard it's
yeah,
great.
actually, the Aurora tour itself, I only went on once when I used to work for Diane. I never gave that one.
Yeah.
This past winter, with her and Mike, the new owner, they brought back the ghost tours inside the old roundhouse in Aurora, which is right there near the
Oh,
river.
very cool.
Which
Yeah.
Diane trained me in how to be like her backup on that tour, and with her, I did a couple of them this winter. Plus, I did a few of them on my own, and just stories abound about ghost in the old Aurora Roundhouse, which was the train station in Aurora. Not only was it the train station, it was also where they used to repair and turn the trains around. It was built in the 1850s, and it lasted up till 1974. It was eventually taken over by Walter Payton, the former Bears
Right. Yeah.
running back, who turned it into a nightclub, restaurant, and event venue. I don't know if you've ever been there. It's absolutely
Haven't
stunning.
been there. I've heard it is really cool.
And not only is it near the water, but it's also made entirely of limestone, which again, there's
Wow.
more theories. Limestone,
Well, yeah,
holding on to
limestone
energy.
holding on to energy. Yeah. Ghost hunters love looking at limestone buildings, right?
Mhm. Right, exactly.
Well, we'll have to do another future episode just on Ghosts of Aurora. That would
Right.
really,
Yeah.
we can do all the towns along the Fox River. That would be really cool.
Mhm.
Well, very cool. If we missed anything in Elgin,
Let's think. There's also another cemetery that's not as well known. That the first couple of years that I worked for Diane, we used to go into. It's a Catholic cemetery, Mount Hope, and the from Mount Hope that people would see. It's right off the road, Route 20.
I remember passing
And
it. Yeah, Route 20. Yeah.
yeah, I'm sure if you go if you're heading into downtown Elgin, you would pass it. The stories of it are of people seeing like dancing balls of light throughout the cemetery. And there were several nights on the tours we would get pictures of these red and green orbs of light moving throughout the cemetery. We'd also get, and it was not near any electrical sources. When you get into the cemetery, the only electricity would have been around the little office building. But we used to get a lot of real high EMF readings, electromagnetic field readings, on meters in that cemetery.
And no power lines or anything around there.
Surrounding the cemetery, but I don't think that it being in the center of the cemetery, I don't think they would have,
Yeah.
you're a little further away.
Yeah, is there limestone under there too?
That's a good question. Could be.
Might be. I heard when I was doing a lot of research at Bachelor's Grove Cemetery outside of Chicago, Southwest, very famous haunted cemetery. There are a lot of theories about, these, this was, they're called these balls of light called will-o'-the-wisps in, the folklore of England and Ireland, Scotland, where a lot of these settlers came from. And one of the theories was that these balls of light would appear over the graves of unbaptized infants. And that was where you could see where the unbaptized babies were, which is a theory I'd never heard before. But there's all these theories that there's spirits, that they're ghosts, there's also an old legend that these lights appear over places where there's treasure buried, which I hadn't heard before, but I thought was also interesting. So a lot of different theories about what those lights are, but that's really cool. I have to go visit that cemetery next time we're there. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today. You can
Thank you.
enjoy Tony's immense knowledge of history and hauntings and live in person through Chicago Hauntings Tours, where he gives tours in Chicago. He gives great bus tours of the city. He also gives walking tours of Lincoln Park, which is its own unmarked cemetery with a lot of paranormal activity in Chicago, there on the lakefront, and also gives tours in Naperville and Aurora. And you also occasionally gives tours of Elgin, and those would be through Chicago Hauntings, right? So chicagohauntings.com.
Well, I did for you. We haven't brought him back yet under Mike, but it's something I want to talk to him about doing.
Okay. And then you do a lot of your own like events at different places too. So how can people find you on Facebook to sign up for those? Or
Well, you can find me under my name, Tony Szabelski. I have where I do some of the events. It's a site called Chicagoland Tours and Mysterious Events. So you could find me there. That's where I list a lot of the ghost hunting events.
Okay, and I'll put all those, all these links in the description so you guys can go right to them.
I'm kind of like you these days. I really don't actively do a lot of ghost hunting, but I still do run the events mainly because when I was giving tours, I'd get so many people asking me to do ghost hunting events. So I would set them up for people.
Great. And then people can probably hire you too to do a private event, right?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay, great. I'll put all your contact info so people can get in touch with you. Thank you.
Prairie Avenue too. We do the walking tour Monday.
Oh, right. Yeah, the walking tour Prairie Avenue, the old historic neighborhood in Chicago, which also skirts the burial ground of the victims of the Fort Dearborn massacre. So a really haunted area of Chicago and very historic area as well. So yeah, so check those out, the Prairie Avenue tours. And these all run every week throughout most of the year. Unless there's like a blizzard or something, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
All right, great. Well, thanks so much for being here with me today. Thank you very much, Tony Szabelski. Awesome, from Chicago Hauntings. And we will see all of you guys on the channel. Make sure you like the video, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you'll get notified when we post our next video. Thanks so much for being here. I'll take care.